How about, do we want to get going again?
Let's get going. All right. Nice. My age, I gotta go to the boys' room.
Try having 5 kids and not going to the bathroom. Try having 5 kids and taking any extended time away from a bathroom. All right, here we go. We're back at it. 1, 2, 3, back in order. Okay, here we have, this is really the commissioner show. Maybe I should let you introduce everybody, Commissioner?
Yeah, so we're going to get to that in a second. I'm just going to do some brief school reopening updates, and which will lead into Como and Friends. Okay?
Absolutely.
Does that work for you?
Yep.
Since our meeting on April 20th, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed has continued to inform districts of new developments related to COVID-19 and to support schools and districts as they bring more students back into class. Following the board's vote in March to give me the discretion to end hybrid and remote learning models as district-wide approaches, the Commonwealth began a phased approach to reopening our schools for full in-person instruction. This approach culminated with the return of students in grade 9 through 12 on May 17th. While over 60% of districts in grades 9 to 12 were already open, the remaining districts opened on that date. In summary, at this time, 100% of our elementary and middle schools are in, and 99% of our high schools were open for full-time in-person instruction by the week of May 17th. I know that this was a split vote when the vote was taken in March to grant me the authority, and we'll be voting on a final vote later, but I do think at this time that we made the right decision to move forward. To continue to support students, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has announced on April 20th that it has extended free school meals for all students over the summer and through the end of the 2021-2022 school year. We're grateful to all school nutrition workers who continue to provide meals to our students who are learning in school and the smaller number who are still learning remotely. We continue to revise previous guidance as we learn more about COVID-19 and as more people become vaccinated. We are increasingly turning our attention to the summer and fall, to the supports that students will need, and to the massive infusion of federal funds that is on the way. Part of that is what you're going to hear today around our acceleration roadmap and our other plans for the fall. While school and district leaders, educators, students, and families have demonstrated ingenuity and perseverance over the last year and have gained many new skills and experiences, school and district leaders are grappling with many questions, from how to create an instructional plan that meets students' varied needs to how to keep equity at the center of our discussions. Schools and districts, along with the department, need to take the lessons learned during this school year and create a clear vision and a plan for what teaching and learning will look like moving forward. To support schools and districts in the process, the department plans to release an academic excellence roadmap this month that will include easy-to-navigate guides and resources, as well as training opportunities for school system leaders and educators. The roadmap identifies 3 key priorities for the next school year: creating a sense of belonging for students and families, monitoring student understanding, and ensuring access to grade-level content. These priorities are centered on the research-based approach of acceleration, providing just-in-time scaffolds to create access to grade-level assignments rather than focusing exclusively on the prior year's content. The roadmap contains a teacher guide and a leader guide designed for building leaders and those at the district level who support them. Grounded in evidence-based practices, the roadmap is designed to help schools and districts create an academic plan for the next school year, and it provides month-by-month priority actions to implement the plan and monitor progress. The roadmap also directs users to DESE resources for acceleration, such as literacy screeners, math acceleration programs, a family engagement guide, and resources for establishing a multi-tiered system of support. You will hear more about this from our Senior Associate Commissioner, Mabese, and our Director of Remote Learning, Jackie Ganser, and they are here today. So welcome, and you may begin when ready.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair Craven and members of the board. We are here today to introduce the Massachusetts Acceleration Roadmap, which is being released today to the public as a tool to support our educators in supporting student needs this fall. Today we'll talk a bit about our vision for the roadmap, the engagement and design process, give you an overview of the content in the guides, and talk about implementation support for the field. But before I start, I want to acknowledge many individuals who contributed directly to the content and structure of this work. my colleague Jackie Ganser, our internal roadmap team, our colleagues across the Department of Education from many centers who have contributed resources to the guide, the 200 plus educators, students, family members, members of advisory councils and advocacy organizations across the state who joined focus groups and one-on-one conversations to advise on the guide. And in particular, I want to thank Member Coughlin's peers on the Student Advisory Council who were invaluable in helping us ensure student participation and student voice in this process. I'd also like to thank our colleagues at TNTP, a partner who was contracted to help with the development of the guide. So what was the need that we heard from the field? Every year, our educators and our building administrators have to determine how to support students who are coming in at different places, leveraging their unique strengths and supporting in their areas of need. We are anticipating that due to the pandemic, the variability and intensity of these needs will be wider this year. And so in planning for the fall, schools and districts are considering multiple approaches to support planning for student needs. One consideration are the programs that they'll need to adopt. So for example, summer programming, use of extended learning time offerings, after-school tutoring. Another set of considerations involves their priorities for core academic instruction in the fall. Both of these are crucial considerations, and the roadmap addresses the latter, the daily experience of teaching and learning. We wanted to provide concrete and tangible resources to help classroom educators and building administrators prioritize high-impact actions that they can take to identify and address student needs in daily classroom instruction this fall. These high-impact actions are grounded in an evidence-based approach we refer to as learning acceleration. At a high level, this approach promotes that every student receives regular opportunities to engage with grade-appropriate content while receiving coordinated, just-in-time scaffolds or coordinated interventions. We distinguish this from the strategy of remediation, which assumes that all students need to begin the year with 4 to 5 units of prior grade content. In accelerated learning, students do have access to prior grade content if necessary. But the key pieces is that those are data informed and provided in the service of grade level content. Research shows high returns for students when accelerated learning strategies are put in place.
So our charge was to figure out how to make this approach of learning acceleration, thank you, both accessible and actionable to all of our educators this fall. So back in February, we released a bid to identify a vendor who could help us articulate what the evidence-based practices are that support learning acceleration and to help our educators and system leaders implement those practices. In April, we contracted with TNTP and officially launched this project, which, as you can see here, has involved synthesizing relevant research, facilitating extensive stakeholder engagement, creating the roadmap and compiling the relevant resources, which is where we are today, as well as providing many professional learning opportunities. While we're excited to share the roadmap broadly today, we also acknowledge that much more goes into implementation and expanding practice than simply reading a guide or understanding the what of the work. So in addition to the roadmap, today we're also launching a suite of professional learning options to support with implementation. Starting in June and extending to the fall, these will support our schools with the how. Before jumping into the content of the roadmap, we also wanted to share some of the highlights of the engagement and design process that we took to get here. Over the past few months, DESE has been working to adopt a racial equity decision-making protocol, which you can see here. The overarching rationale for this protocol is that in order to achieve greater equity, policies and programs should be developed and implemented with thoughtful consideration of what the equity goals are from the onset, as several members have talked about today. And that when these are not brought to the forefront of the implementation and decision-making process, inequities are much more likely to persist. So while the roadmap was created to support strong instruction in every classroom across the Commonwealth, we thought it was important to pilot this protocol in order to hold ourselves accountable to keeping equity at the forefront of the entire process. One specific area I want to highlight, and which is implemented throughout several stages of this protocol, is the level of stakeholder engagement involved in multiple places thus far. From setting the initial vision to this work and defining the initiative, to reviewing the evidence-based practices that TNTP recommended in the data analysis portion, ensuring diverse representation in our stakeholder engagement, directly informing the content and the format of the roadmap, and even helping us think about how to effectively communicate these practices across the Commonwealth. This engagement has been a critical aspect of both the roadmap process and walking us through this equity decision-making process. And it will continue to be as we continue to work our way through it. We tried to be really thoughtful about which stakeholders were brought into each stage of this process. Our educators, including those at the classroom, the school, and the district level, were brought in as early as the vendor selection process. In terms of shaping the content and the format of the guide, as Komal mentioned, we engaged in multiple focus groups, one-on-one conversations with our educators, with students, with families, with several advisory councils, and with a number of advocates. The map here shows the geographic distribution of the more than 200 stakeholders who responded to our open call for participation. So what did we hear from our stakeholders? Here's a high-level summary of the feedback that we heard. Our educators overwhelmingly aligned with the key priorities we've identified in the roadmap, and as the commissioner highlighted it in his comments. We also heard a strong need for tangible actions and specific relevant resources to aid in implementation. We also received a lot of feedback about the format and the structure, which was directly incorporated to the design of the roadmap in order to make it as user-friendly and actionable as possible. From our students and families, we heard significant agreement that there should be a focus on ensuring every student has access to grade-level work starting in the fall. Our families highlighted the need for clear and consistent two-way communication from schools and districts this year. And you will see this reflected in the first priority of the roadmap around creating a sense of belonging. And our students elevated the need for ongoing support for social and emotional learning, which is reinforced in that first priority as well. We not only deeply valued the perspectives that these stakeholders shared with us, but we noticed several points along the way that we could directly incorporate their feedback into the design of the roadmap, which has led to a much stronger product, which you see in front of you now. In order to keep a pulse on the roadmap's reception and the ongoing needs of our schools and school communities, we've built in brief feedback surveys throughout the roadmap and plan to conduct additional ongoing outreach in the weeks and months to come.
So with this process and stakeholder engagement under our belt, our focus turned to producing the guide that you should have in front of you. I'd like to highlight a few features, thank you, of the guide. The first is you'll notice it's in two parts. We've produced a classroom educator guide and a guide focused at building administrators. Again, these are focused on the what, concrete actions to take to support strong teaching and learning this fall. We will focus professional learning sessions on the how to manage change, how to leverage diverse voices, how to implement the strategies in the guide. So what do the guides look like? We've organized both documents around 3 central priorities, which you see here on the slide. Developing a sense of belonging in school, monitoring student understanding, and providing access points to grade level instruction. The guide is also broken up into 4 phases of the year. The diagnostic and planning phase in the summer, the launch of school from September to October, progress monitoring from November to April of next year, and reflection and planning towards the end of the school year. The document is structured according to these phases, so our users are able to turn to the relevant section of the guide based on the time of year that they're accessing it. The content in the guide that follows this is a series of printable one-page documents. For each phase and priority, we have created a one-page document with more details on the action steps that you can see here. Next to the action steps are links to key resources that will support in the implementation of those steps. Some of these links point to external resources, but many of the links point to key resources created by our colleagues within the Department of Education. So for example, we highlight the systems for multi-tiered systems of support created by our colleagues Becca Shore and Andrea Ricotta. We highlight the math acceleration resources produced by the team led by Erin Hashimoto-Martel and Ian Stith. And we also highlight the math literacy resources produced by our colleagues Catherine Tarka, as well as Heather Pesky's team and the Center for Instructional Support. Another key feature of these one-pagers is that they're organized developmentally in a chart. We recognize for some educators, these action steps may be new ideas, but many educators may already be doing some combination of these action steps. And so the guide is organized to meet educators where they are. Each chart is organized as a sequence list. Educators can start at the top, check off the action steps that they feel confident in completing, and then focus on the series of unchecked items to prioritize a list of steps that will be high leverage to support students in the fall. Our webinars on using the guide will help educators engage and identify with an ambitious and attainable set of action steps to take on for the fall, rather than attempting every action step at once. The final design feature we'd like to draw your attention to is that feedback opportunities are embedded within the tool at the end of each phase and priority, so that as users are engaging with the guide, we can ask them for feedback on their user experience. We'll also be collecting stakeholder input throughout the spring through our feedback surveys after our professional learning experiences and our webinars, and we'll continue some focus groups as we consider the rollout. This will keep our attention on the needs of the field with an eye towards implementation. It's also worth noting some crucial or core concepts of the guide. The first is that adopting an asset-based approach to supporting student learning needs this fall will be crucial. We must anchor our scaffolds in what the data tells us our students need, rather than our assumptions about what they can and cannot do. The next is that principles of culturally responsive teaching and culturally sustaining practices are part of each priority. They are woven into each of the sections of the guide, rather than being pulled out as a separate priority. And finally, the focus of the guide is on elements of daily core instruction as a high-impact lever for student growth. So we've discussed the guide, the core concepts underpinning it, and the process for development and structure. What's next? Also being released today with the guide is a set of professional learning opportunities that accompany the guide. You can see some of the highlights here. We have some webinars that will support educators in identifying their high leverage action steps for using the guide. We'll also be providing staggered tracks of professional learning, a sequence in June and July that focus on core concepts in the guide. We will then be repeating the sequence in July and August for educators who prefer to engage later in the season. All of our professional learning will also be available to the field in free on-demand modules that can be used to engage in the learning on their own time or to turnkey these professional learning experiences in their own settings. You can see here some highlights from our professional learning sequence. These will be customized in role-alike groups. So educators will have access to learning, for example, on diagnosing and planning for unfinished learning, supporting students with diverse learning needs. Leaders will have access to workshops on change management and building a sense of belonging for students and families. We're also exploring the possibility of additional supports, such as office hours to the field, and we'll be continually referencing our feedback surveys and our focus groups for an understanding of really what the field would find valuable. Our hope is that these guides help our educators feel confident in the steps they're already taking and prioritize high-leverage next steps and access resources that match with those action steps in order to set our students up for success in the fall. So we thank you for your time today and are open to any questions you have at this time.
Thank you very much. And I apologize, I had to take a call, but I know I was in good hands with my vice chair. Any questions? Member Stewart.
Thank you so much. I guess I'm really interested in how you envision this implementation actually moving forward in districts. So is this something that is accomplished through teams of educators and families? Is there a way to, I mean, it just feels like you need a lot of people for one thing. It's just, what's going to, really keep this moving forward so that it has the kind of desirable outcome that we want, which is, accelerating and picking up and, so that remediation is not the main thing, right?
Thank you, that's a great question. Our hope is to really focus here on the implementation support for the field. We are looking to support the work of our hardworking educators rather than create another compliance-driven activity for those of us in Malden. And so really, the implementation comes from driving participation in our webinars, providing support to leaders. The leader guide walks leaders through the process of engaging with stakeholders. We have resources for bringing together teams within your community, asset mapping in your community, and drawing on student and family voice in making decisions. So these are all parts of the guide. So leaders who come to our webinars will be able to look through these, identify the areas where they're already engaging in these practices, and identify their next steps. We're also working with our colleagues throughout the department who work directly with schools and districts, so our colleagues in the statewide system of support, to think about how we can bring our webinars and our professional learning experiences about this guide to the places where our leaders are already planning to be, and to support them in utilizing this in their meetings, in their existing meetings and workshops.
I would want to have access to, some of that. I mean, obviously, a lot of families are going to want to pull together and take a look at some of these things and see, through their individual lenses, and then bring that into the school and have those kinds of conversations with, the leaders within schools and also with educators. So I guess I'm just seeing it, it's a multi-pronged approach, as we always like to say, but it's, really critical that does happen. And, obviously not with the kinds of, you want this to be a very easy flow back and forth, but I can imagine that it can be very challenging at times, as we have seen.
Any other questions for Kamal and Jackie? Oh, Member Hills?
Just one question. I'm always curious when DESE undertakes initiatives like this, kind of what differences, if any, you see in the districts that use it more versus the districts that use it less. And I always have this kind of view, kind of larger districts with a lot of critical mass, they do some of this work themselves, they use DESE less. I don't actually know if that's true. It's just kind of an initial thought. Are you seeing or expecting any differences among districts and types of districts as to kind of who takes more use of this versus less?
It's a good question. I think that, and thank you for that, I think our hope is that this is accessible to our districts, to all of our districts, to really create school experiences for students that center the needs of the students in front of them. And I think that is something that all districts can truly benefit from, and many districts are doing already. And so I think our hope is to create something that is usable in the field, and our outreach to diverse stakeholder groups really confirmed that there were similar needs, right? The learning needs may be more diverse in certain areas, but they may not be. This has been an unusual year, but in all schools, in all districts, it is important to differentiate for the needs of all students in front of us.
Member West?
Thank you, Board. I wonder if you could help put this effort into the context of the state's role in supporting good instruction in the past. To what extent does the strategy that you're taking now represent a fundamental departure or a more expansive view of the state's role? And to what extent, could it be an opportunity to learn about how the state can play a stronger role in influencing instruction at the local level?
Yeah, what I would say is historically we've kind of set the standards and given a lot of authority for districts to choose which curriculums they want to use, for instance. But we haven't always been kind of the role models about what we think good instruction is. And this is a change for DESE where we're going to try to stand up, give exemplars of what we're looking for, what we think quality instruction is.
Thanks. That was what I was understanding, and so it's good to have that confirmed.
Member Fernandez?
Thank you for your presentation. It sounds like, and if you can help me understand if I'm hearing this correctly, that what is being offered here would be optional, but I'm wondering what you would all recommend, or if there's already maybe something that's not in this presentation that will be held up as what would be optimal for a district to sort of take on this work, and what it would look like in its very specific implementation as it relates to a school, perhaps a school. And how would this shake out or be rolled out within a school setting with the leadership of the school, with the educators, with families involved?
I think it's a great question. The roadmap sort of is a menu of options. And so it allows leaders and educators to sort of diagnose where they are and say, these are the steps I have in place, and these are the action steps I can take further in order to create that sense of belonging, monitor student understanding, and create supports for students to access grade level content. So I think in our optimal world, leaders would be engaging in our webinars over the next few months to really create those priorities for their school, set a really clear instructional vision, and that districts would be supporting the leaders in creating those visions for their particular school environments, and then providing clarity to their educators and support to their educators in executing on those strategies.
Como could I?
Vice Chair Morton and then Member Lombos.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation today. It's very exciting, and the idea that schools can create these roadmaps, and that there will be this constant focus as a priority on cultural competence and making sure that every child has access to what they need. I was going to ask a couple of questions about the consultant or the contractor that you've selected. What experience did they have in this particular area, and what experience do they have around cultural competence? That'd be one question. And then I would love to see, I would love to have in front of us at some point when this has been implemented, schools that have tried it and what their experience, Member Hill's question. And so I would ask that you give us that opportunity to talk to the schools that implement it, so we can see what their experience has been.
Great recommendation. I can take the question about the vendor background. So when we designed the bid to seek the vendor, we were pretty specific about what types of experience and qualifications they had to have. Included in those requirements were a deep understanding of the Massachusetts education landscape, knowing that this would be a quick process. We needed somebody who was already up to speed on how we're organized and our many schools and districts' needs and strengths. We also required that the vendor had experience and deep expertise in learning acceleration specifically. And so we were looking for somebody who already knew the research, who had developed guides before and was very familiar with this content. We were looking for an expert to help us shape what we wanted to do. And in addition to that, we also made it a requirement that the vendor had deep experience with culturally responsive teaching and pedagogy and engaging diverse stakeholders. Knowing that those were going to be key components of the guide in the process, again, we didn't want to waste any time in getting the vendor up to speed. And TNTP rose to the top in all of these areas, along with a number of preferred qualifications that we added to the bid as well. We were also really excited to engage stakeholders in that review process to confirm what we were seeing in their background and qualifications as well. We received a lot of support from those stakeholders in selecting TNTP. And as for the case studies, this actually came to mind when Member Fernandez was speaking as well. When we were engaging with our district and our school leaders in particular, they were really spread across the spectrum in what they needed and what they acknowledged as their strengths and gaps in learning acceleration, but expressed an overwhelming demand for, this is right, we want to do this, we need the help to do this. But what that help was and what they required was very different. And so we really designed the roadmap and the professional learning opportunities to try to meet those diverse needs. What we're looking forward to over the summer and throughout next year is, throughout this process, identifying where those exemplars are standing up and what that optimal implementation plan and process looks like. So we expect to create additional resources, examples, templates, and all of those throughout the summer, as well as throughout next year, to support implementation. And I'm also really excited to see some of those case studies and look forward to bringing those back to you all.
A question about, and this is incredible. I love the framework. I love that you use the equity decision-making process. It's all awesome. One question I had, you mentioned that some districts are already doing this stuff. I would love to hear, you don't have to answer it right now, but just some of the districts that you've already held up as exemplars. Second, if we can get a list of the stakeholders that were participated, would love to see who was involved in this entire process. Just would be great. And then just my question is, in the roadmap guide, you said that districts will be able to just participate based on where they're at, which is great. Is there an assessment tool to identify where they're at? And would love to see just what those questions are, that they're self-assessing themselves and then figuring out where they're at along the spectrum of cultural competency and all of that.
Thank you. Those are really helpful considerations. I'm writing down the list to share. In terms of a self-assessment, we don't have a separate self-assessment tool, but the document is designed in sort of checklist format. So and each one-pager is sort of organized around sort of some guiding questions. And so what districts can do is sort of assess what practices they have in place already and sort of see those practices grouped by guiding question, which gives them a sense of where they should be starting in terms of next steps.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is maybe a question to be answered later or for further thought, but especially in the context of the leader roadmap, raising sort of either questions or creating some kind of framework for decision making around resource allocation and staffing, and some of the things that obviously are going to vary from place to place depending on what their resource and staffing situation currently is, but also in the context of the ESSER dollars that we already mentioned, we'll be talking about some more, the extent to which in the near term, especially as they're implementing something new, which is always challenging and always going to be difficult to do, whether there are additional adults in the classroom, additional support staff in the school, or certainly on the mental health and social emotional side and behavioral side, the extent to which other professional staff may be necessary in order to make the change in the classroom and in the classroom practice feasible under the circumstances. So again, I know that's going to be different from place to place, but it seems to me that some of those decisions need to be, and some of those choices need to be engaged, right now as we're going into the next year, so that they can put the staffing models in place, they can find the resources and allocate them appropriately.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question?
Okay, I think we're going to switch to the funding with Matt Denninger, if folks are done. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kamal and Jackie.
I may ask, so Kumo was prepared to come back later to talk about kind of what it looks like in action with the deeper learning and everything. I may ask that to be pushed to the June meeting so that she could bring back some of the additional information that board members requested.
Great.
But we could talk, that's your decision,
I think
Madam
that
Chair.
makes more sense, Commissioner.
Okay. In the meantime, it's important to move on to the money. As folks have spoken about at public comment today, and you are aware, the federal government has sent significant resources to school districts known as ESSER funding, 2/3 of which, ESSER 1 and 2, have been allocated already to districts. The last portion is in the process of allocation as we speak. Matt Denninger is here today to talk about the process and what's happening with those dollars. Matthew.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for having me today. I wanted to give you a broad overview of what all of the major relief funding streams look like. And so the picture you see up on the PowerPoint is these are the biggest streams. This isn't an exhaustive list of all of the grants going out, but these are the largest grants, and you can see them sequenced by when they expire. So what you're looking at, therefore, is about $2.8 billion over the next 3.5 years, spread out among these 5 major funding streams, one of which was from the State Coronavirus Prevention Fund at the top, but the rest are federal streams. And so I think we're at a point where districts can take a step back and really plan out what are the next 3.25 years going to look like. This latest fund that we have from the American Rescue Plan Act that came out just a couple of months ago, ESSER 3, is by far the largest. And like its 2 predecessors, it uses the Title I formula, which distributes funding in an equitable manner toward districts that serve the largest concentration of students from low-income households. The U.S. Department of Education has granted 2/3 of the funds already to the state, and we must apply by June 7th for the final third. And also, unlike its 2 predecessors, ESSER 3 has several requirements for DESE and our districts that we have to comply with in order to get the final third of money. First of which is consultation with a wide variety of stakeholders. So we've actually consulted, this month has been very busy. We have been doing lots of consultation meetings. You can see all of the places that we've had consultation meetings with, really listening sessions to get feedback on what are you seeing, what are the biggest priorities, and what are the issues that are most important for you. And we've also got a few coming up, as you can see, trying to get in as many as we can before June 7th. We also have a public survey. It's open to the public. It's translated. And we're getting input from the general public there. And also, I would invite any of the board members here today, if you would like to have a one-on-one consultation session, please just let me know, and we'd be happy to set something up. We also have to submit a plan. As I said, it has to be submitted by June 7th. And really, this is a way to show the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, that we have done our consultation, that we understand the conditions on the ground, that we have done our stakeholder outreach, and that we have a plan to prioritize how we're going to use the funds. These funds are also, they come with a set aside, so a portion of this grant, unlike the previous two ESSER grants, we have to set aside for things like summer learning, after school programs, and specific interventions that address learning loss or lost instructional time. There is also a maintenance of equity provision, which is a new feature for ESSER 3. It basically it says that Massachusetts must maintain state support to its highest poverty school districts, which our Chapter 70 formula does, and SOA certainly does. So those are the requirements of DESE. The requirements for districts are similar, right? Districts will apply for these funds from DESE. These applications are available now. The funding opportunity is open. But unlike DESE, where we have to get this application in by June 7th, we're getting